Thanks very much for inviting me to come and speak today, and thanks to Charles River Associates especially for doing so much work to put this report together. I think I'm really excited to see this work coming out of IFPMA. It's definitely an area that's near and dear to my heart, so I'm happy to be here today and provide a few comments to get the discussion going. I think, first of all, I think the importance of this isn't, it couldn't be any more relevant today. It's really good timing, especially to have the panelists that you have convened here to really come together and talk about what have we learned over the past 10 years and how can we bring that forward into the next 10 years with new challenges that we're going to have to face together. And I think the point that you ended on is really important. I think you're right. I think we need to figure out what the role is for the innovator companies along with the generic companies, because each play an equally important role. I think in terms of the report itself, I think the methodological approach in terms of combining the qualitative and quantitative was really smart and very important. There's only so far you can go with either method, and it has to be a combination of both. And so I think that the use of both of those methods was really the right way to think about these problems. That said, I, as a reader, had some difficulty sort of moving back and forth between the methods throughout the paper, and found it difficult to differentiate which method was being applied to which policy question you were trying to answer. And the title of the report is, the first word is evidence, right? And many of the methods used are important and informative, but not necessarily qualifying as evidence. And so it would be helpful to be more clear on sort of really being specific about, here are the policy questions we wanted to ask, here are the methods that we applied to each of the policy questions, and here's the results that we got, here's the limitations. And I think that part was missing, so it made it difficult for me to follow the recommendations in the end. I'm going to leave the country-specific things to Maria Angela and others who have a lot more experience, and really focus some of my specific comments on the areas that I know best, and that's around the analytics. And so here we're really talking mostly about Chapter 5, I think. So I think it's fantastic that the group decided to sort of take the same approach of using existing data, and I think they brought in some important variables that tell more of a story than what's been told before. And so I commend them for that. I think from my perspective, having spent many years looking at this data, the biggest problem I have is that there's absolutely no discussion of how you created the data sets, specifically around just downloading GPRM data. You will be missing a lot of information. So if you look at the limitation sections of the papers that I've written, the limitation sections are longer than the results sections. And that's because there are so many issues. It's the reason that we combined data from SCMS with Global Fund, with WHO, was not because we wanted to duplicate things, it's because GPRM was missing data. So, for example, PEPFAR data hasn't been showing up there in a very long time. That's really going to change what you're seeing when you have a large buyer like that missing from the data set. There's times in which data is available on one day in the system and not on the next, and so you really have to do due diligence when using that in order to make any type of recommendations. And I think we tried to lay that out in each of the papers to say you really have to cobble things together if you want to use this database to answer questions in a statistical kind of way. So for me, that was a hard place to start, even though I really liked the idea of the variables that you brought in and the additional sort of descriptors that you used. That said, when it came getting back to the evidence thing, Obviously, we can't do a randomized clinical trial when we're looking at these issues. That would be the best evidence. So we're stuck with these analytic models. And from what I could tell, the only sort of real policy variables, and maybe you can clarify this, in the model were really around compulsory licensing. I mean, there were some descriptors around spending and that sort of thing, but it wasn't clear to me what specific policy variables you had in the model. And something like compulsory license, I'm not an IP expert, and I'll leave this to Mariangela to comment on, but it would seem to me that the threat is worse than is just as powerful as the actual license, and it would be a difficult thing to capture in an analytic model. It would be my guess, but I'll leave Mariangela to comment on that. There was lots of discussion on differential pricing, and I think it's a critical discussion that has to happen, but no real analytics around it. I mean, I think you had these countries that you've selected, and it's still not exactly clear to me why these countries were selected, but it would be good to know, through an analytic exercise, what was the result of these differential prices? Were countries using them? What was the price spread? And that I felt was missing from the results and only discussed in a very sort of cursory way in terms of which companies have actual policies and that sort of thing. So I think, all in all, I think, well done. I think it's a piece of work that adds to the literature that's out there. I think it's great that IFPMA is having this dialogue and beginning to think about things. I think in terms of next steps, I think there's a lot of work we still need to do together, and I think there's a lot that this group could bring to the table that would not otherwise be there. You had a lot of sort of statements around price reductions, even though there was patent status available. I think it was tenofovir, lopinavir, ritonavir, and efavirenz. So you had those 3 drugs. You limited it to 3 drugs, but you didn't really answer that question. You made a statement, but you didn't really analytically test whether or not patent issues were related to or not related to the price trends that you were seeing. And I think that information is starting to become available. You have more information than us. You can actually do that work. And I think the Medicines Patent Pool now has a database of some information that could be easily combined into what you're doing. And I think you're well suited to do that type of work. I also think when you think about those 3 products and the 3 companies that make those products, they're very different companies and might have very different reasons for how they're pricing their products in the market, whether they be a business model of a small new company versus a philanthropic decision at another company. And I think sort of on a qualitative side, understanding why companies are making certain decisions and bringing that to the table would be really valuable. And then I guess finally, I think the other thing that you can bring to the table more so than us is the benefits of information from IMS. And I think Richard Lang and others have started to work with IMS and their global health group to look at certain things. And I think certainly this research and the answers that you're trying to get could be well addressed through bringing in some of that information that, again, you're going to have better access to than us. But I guess in summary, I would say, well done. Thank you for doing this work. Thanks for inviting us. And I hope that we can continue to talk about how to work together to address these issues.